For those of you who don't know me, my name is Stef McGraw. I'm a current CFI on-campus intern with Tony Lakey, who's doing the AV in the back. And I'm also the vice president of the University of Northern Iowa Freethinkers and Inquirers, Unify for short. And I'm going to be talking about how to build an effective leadership team. I'm talking about this because I think my group has had a lot of success in this, and also I think it's something that's really important. Like, Dren just gave an awesome talk about how to do event planning, but the fact of the matter is that none of these great ideas can come to fruition if your leadership team isn't effective, if it isn't good at following through on all of these great ideas. So I'm going to try and give you guys some tips on how to make sure your team is successful. All right, so I've broken it down into 4 parts. First, the leadership structure. Second, the selection process, which is probably the most controversial thing, but we'll talk about that. Then officer accountability. You have to find a way to make sure your officers are doing what they're supposed to be doing. And then finally, succession planning. In the thing this morning, I forget what it's called, where people talk about what their groups have done. I heard a lot of groups say, yeah, we don't really know what's going to happen in the future, so hopefully I can give you some ideas on how to make sure your group doesn't die. All right, because this is my frame of reference, I'm first going to talk about what Unify's leadership structure is. So we have a president, a vice president, and then this year we have 5 other officers. So we have 7 officers total. And I'm not saying this is the leadership structure that's good for all groups, but I think the point I'm trying to make is something to think about. Every year we talk a lot amongst ourselves about what we want next year's leadership team to look like. And we put a lot of thought into the division of labor and sort of the chain of command. And I think a lot of groups sort of fall into the status quo of what they've always done as far as leadership structure is concerned. But it actually does make a difference, making sure you have enough time devoted to social media or enough time devoted to membership. And like I said, don't be afraid of change. We've changed our officer makeup every single year of our existence. Last year we had chairs, like we had a Darwin Week chair, and we decided it was cool, but we would rather just have an officer be in charge of it instead of having one person specifically. So really the worst that could happen is you go back to your old setup the following year if it didn't work out the best, or make another change. So just don't fall into the status quo. All right, officer selection. What most groups do is basically what I'm calling small group democracy. They each run a little bit differently, but the basic idea is there are set positions, people run for these positions, and then members vote on whom should be in these positions. We run our group a little bit differently. We run our group like a business. The previous president appoints his or her successor, and then last year we started having the new president appoint their vice president. It just depends on your group dynamic. That's not something that's really necessary. And then together the president and vice president confirm what the next year's leadership structure is going to be. So in Unify's case, our previous president, Corey, appointed Michael, who is our current president, who unfortunately isn't here today, and then he appointed me to the vice presidency, and then we got together and came up with our leadership structure and sort of brainstormed what we wanted the group to be. And then we went on our blog, unifreethought.com, shameless plug, and we announced the officer positions, like director of social media, director of finance, etc. And we gave people about a week and a half to fill out an application, and then fill out what times they were available for an interview. And the interviews are really the meat of our officer selection process, and we think they're really good for a variety of reasons. One reason is that it's a really good way to answer those questions you want to know when you're trying to select an officer. So what Michael and I did is we came up with about 8 questions we wanted to know. So are they prepared about this position enough, or are they serious about it enough? Let's try that again. Are they serious about this position enough to come prepared? So what we did is we had several prepared questions for the interview, and one of them this year was, what is another student group on campus that you think is well run, and what can Unify learn from them? And it told us a lot about them. If they just showed up and said, oh, the math club puts on some good talks, I guess, something, it's like, cool, but you didn't really put a lot of thought into that. But if someone showed up and said, oh, well, the marketing club on campus does a bar hop every year. And this is something that our marketing club actually does, and we might steal from them. They put on a bar hop every year, and they sell t-shirts, and they raise a lot of money, and they get a lot of publicity, and everyone knows who they are on campus because of this. And they get to work with local businesses. Even if you think the idea of a bar hop is a horrible idea, at least it tells you about, what it tells you about that officer is that they're serious about the group, they're able to come prepared, they're able to take an idea and mold it so that it can fit your group. And then here are just some other questions we asked ourselves, and then the actual interview questions that came out of that. And something important to note is that there's not necessarily a right answer for all of these. We just sort of want to gauge where they are in certain things. So for instance, for do they have past leadership experience? Even if they don't, it doesn't mean they can't be an officer. We just want to make sure there's enough people on our team who do have leadership experience, just so we can build a good team. All right, so here's some benefits of the run it like a business model. I was trying to think of like a catchy name, and if anyone has any ideas, let me know, but that was the best I could come up with. So it keeps officers motivated to do a good job. This is gonna sound harsh, but if our officers don't do a good job, they will get replaced. And we're not like hard asses about it, but if someone's really not doing their work, they know that there's other people who applied for their position who didn't get it, who are probably qualified, and we can replace them with them. So we've actually done that a few times, and that's actually how I became an officer my freshman year. The director of outreach wasn't doing a good job, so they asked her to step down, and then I applied and got it, and here I am. Another thing is that officers get picked on qualifications rather than popularity. I think that's the biggest concern with a lot of student groups is that it's a really tight-knit community. There's a lot of friend groups within the student groups, and everyone wants to vote for their friends. And in fact, I had several friends who applied to be officers who didn't get it, and I knew that if we had elected our officers democratically, I probably would have voted for them because they really wanted it, and I love my friends, of course. But you really want to pick officers who are going to do a good job, even if they're not the most outgoing or even if they're not the most likable in some cases. Interviews also allow for more in-depth analysis of each candidate. Like I showed before, you're able to ask what you want to know about each candidate, and then you can ask questions in an interview that'll tell you that. Also, there's time to deliberate and pick the best team rather than the best individuals. This was something that we ran up against a lot this year. We took a really long time deciding who we were going to put in the other 5 officer positions. But in a lot of cases, we put together who we thought was the best person in each position, and then we looked at our team and we said, whoa, we don't have someone who is X. Something that's really important is to make sure you have a diverse leadership team in a variety of aspects. I mean, gender, I mean, people who can do social media, people who are more outgoing, I mean, just everything you can think of, like social diversity, people who are into sports, people who are into video games. You sort of want a diverse group of people represented in your leadership team, and that's something important to think about that you can do with this model. And then also succession planning, and I'll talk more about that at the end. Okay, so there's a lot of objections to this, and I've heard all of these. The first one is, it's like a dictatorship. You need to elect people democratically or else it's a dictatorship. No, it's not. It's like a business. There are plenty of organizations that don't do things democratically. They interview people for positions, and they're not a dictatorship. And also, there's a lot of turnover in universities, so it's not a dictatorship. Democracy is a humanist value. I think this is James Croft's objection, to call him out again. What? Yes, I agree on a large scale, democracy is a humanist value. However, in a small group, not necessarily. No one is being forced to be in this group, and there is a whole team of people. It's not just one person, and yeah. Okay, our members can see who would make a good leader and who wouldn't. So the argument there is, I mean, you can do the same thing. You can have them maybe post a blog post about their ideas for the group, and people can see who would be a good officer that way. That might be true, but the most eloquent writer or speaker isn't always going to be the best officer. Also, I think people who are in like the officer team then sometimes have a better idea of actually what the job takes, so that's something to consider. And then finally, our campus doesn't allow the officers to be elected non-democratically. I can't really help you there. However, the next thing I'm going to talk about is ways to keep your officers accountable. And this is for no matter how you select your officers, you still need to make sure that they're doing what they're expected to do. So what we have in our group is clearly defined general officer expectations. And whenever we offer an officer a position, we sit down with them and we first give them general officer expectations, like check your email every day, roughly. And it seems like sort of a stupid thing, but it's really important to point to if someone isn't doing a good job. Like if we send out some mass officer email and say, hey, we need everyone to give their input on this by the end of the week. And if they consistently don't do that, we can point to it and say, hey, when you agreed to be an officer, you said that you would do this. What's up? Same thing with clearly defined descriptions of each position. Same sort of deal. Regular officer meetings. We have officer meetings every week on Sundays at 3 o'clock. In fact, we meet in the summer, and this will be the only meeting I'm missing because I'll be doing conference things. But yeah, we make sure that we get everything on our to-do list done. We each have a to-do list for the week. And even if there's not something big going on, it's really important to just make sure we're sort of holding each other accountable and we're getting everything done that we're expected to and that we have time to discuss big issues and plan for future events. Yeah, I touched on the weekly to-do list for each officer. A means of regular communication, such as a Google group or a private Facebook group. I know different things work for different groups. We have an email list Google group thing, and so if someone's like, oh, hey, I just confirmed the speaker, we need to figure out a date for their talk, blah, 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 please reply immediately, it's an easy way. They can just send out a mass email to all the officers who are then expected to check their email every day, so everyone should get it and be able to reply. And then finally, a way to correct ineffective or detrimental officer behavior. Again, it sounds harsh, but if someone really isn't doing their job, they shouldn't be an officer. You really want to have an effective team, and if there's someone who's there who's just not getting their stuff done, it doesn't really matter how passionate they are. You need someone who's going to do their work. So you need some way to talk to them or to ask them to step down and replace them. Okay, finally, succession planning. Something that we do that works really well with the interview model is we test out new officers, or new members with different tasks. So for instance, I planned Blasphemy Rights Day this year, and we were going to chalk different things on the sidewalk. And I knew the general idea of what we wanted to chalk, but I decided to recruit like 3 freshmen and say, hey, do you want to help me do some research and figure out what we're going to do? And even though I knew where we were going with this, I got to see who actually showed up. I got to see who came up with some creative ideas. I got to see who was actually paying attention and was really into it, or who kind of got bored. And that told me a lot about who might be a potential good officer. And then we did that with several new members throughout the year. And when it came time for interviews, we asked the people who we thought would maybe make good officers to apply. So one of our new officers was one of the 3 freshmen who I had help me with Blasphemy Rights Day, and it turned out really well. She's doing an awesome job so far. And this is something that you can even do if you elect your officers democratically. Just encourage people to run. Like, try people out with different tasks, and if you've seen that someone is really responsible or really good at whatever you need for your group, just say, hey, you should consider running for this position. Another important thing in succession planning is smooth transitions. So we have our officer team all ready to go and meeting by April 15th, I believe, and that gives us like about 3 weeks before the end of the school year to have the old officers transition the new officers. And even if they are about to graduate or just don't want to be an officer anymore or have switched positions, it gives them time to meet together and sort of go over the job and answer any questions. So I'm going to call out Aaron Friel, who's in the audience. He's our director of social media, which wasn't a position we had last year, but he was our last year's director of finance. And our this year's director of finance is a guy named Joe. And so Aaron and Joe met for a couple weeks before the end of the school year, just periodically, and made sure that Joe knew how to do all the spreadsheets and all of the t-shirt sales and all the other finance things that I don't really get into because that's not my thing. But yeah, so it's really important because you want to make sure that what happened last year just doesn't die out. You don't want to reinvent the wheel. Another thing to that effect is position manuals. So at the end of each year, or in the summer, I still need to write mine, each officer writes a manual for what they did this year and sort of how to do their job. And that's another important not reinventing the wheel thing. So for instance, I was the director of activities last year, and the previous director of activities did a really good job giving me links to how to reserve rooms on campus and how to do advertising on campus, and just gave me all this information so I didn't have to search for it myself. And that saves a lot of time and a lot of mistakes. Also, sort of like what Dren said, ask the advice of graduated officers, other student group leaders, your advisor, for ideas of how to do succession planning. There's other student groups on campus, and even if they don't share our values, they're student groups and they have to do this, so we should try and learn as much as we can from them. And a lot of other groups have to deal with succession planning too, so maybe even the really successful like Navigators or whatever Christian group you have on your campus is really good at succession planning. Just ask them what they do. How do they plan for the future? And then finally, if you get stuck, CFI on campus is here to help. Debbie and Dren are awesome. I've had an amazing time working with them and just taking all their wisdom in. So they know what they're doing. They've both run successful groups, and they have a whole network of student groups, and they've learned things from them too, and they can put you in contact with people who have done this, so reach out to them. All right, so to review, have a clear leadership structure and sort of a clear chain of command. It's important to make sure that each officer has a specified role so everything gets done and nothing falls through the cracks. Consider the run it like a business model for the reasons I outlined. Regardless of how you select your officers, make sure there's ways to hold them accountable and that they're not slacking off and your team is effective. I guess I have that twice, sorry. And then finally, make a succession plan. This is a really important thing. I think there's a lot of group leaders who will be really successful and put on all these really awesome events for like 2 years, and then they'll peace out and graduate and be like, oh, I did my job. I don't really think they did their job. I think part of being an effective officer is making sure that the group still exists in 3 years. If we want our movement to grow, we can't just have a few strong leaders every few years kind of start up a group. We need to sort of have generations of groups going. So here's my contact info if you have any other questions about this sort of thing or just want to chat about group stuff in general. But in the meantime, we're going to do a Q&A if there's any questions.
So a problem that my group has had, and something that I hear from a lot of other groups in my region, is not an overabundance of people wanting to apply for officer positions, but a lot less. So how would you suggest getting people excited to apply for officer positions and take on that responsibility of leadership?
I mean, I wasn't here for the founding of our group, but pretty much ever since I've been a member of Unify, it's sort of been like a prestigious thing to be an officer. Like, everyone knows who the officers are, and they're like, that's really awesome. Like, they're the ones who do all the planning of everything. And a lot of it is that we've been able to grow our group, so bigger groups obviously will probably have more people who are interested in being officers. But I guess somehow add some prestige to it. Like, I mean, you don't have to be like a jackass about it, but I mean, make sure that you introduce yourself as an officer. Make sure people know what the officers are doing and how much fun it is to be an officer and how rewarding it is. Unless anyone else, does anyone else have any ideas about that?
If you physically asked an individual person, hey, have you considered running for this?
Oh yeah, exactly.
Well, yeah, and that's it. Is that most people don't have the confidence even if they have the skill set, and then if you just physically ask lots of people, you'll get it.
Yeah, that's a good one. Whoever.
You have some good ideas with the setting up of the officers in the spring, so they're ready to go for the fall. And I was part of another student group that did that. Typically, ours holds elections a few weeks after the fall school year starts, and so we can also accommodate the incoming freshmen who may want to be an officer right away and have some great novel ideas. So I didn't know if you've experienced doing it both ways, elections in the late spring and getting set up for summer, or elections in the fall, and just if you want to talk about the differences, pros and cons of each.
Yeah, Unify's only done elections, or not elections, interviews in the fall, or sorry, messing that up, interviews in the spring, so that we have all summer to prepare, because as Aaron talked about in the earlier session, we do a big, like, first week of school recruitment event, so we need to have our officers ready to go for that. I see why people do it in the fall, so that excited freshmen can still get involved, but what we've found to be really effective is to sort of do like the testing out freshman thing. Like, we've had some freshmen who they've sort of like taken on their own like mini events that we've given them. I mean, there's other ways to get freshmen involved in a leadership position without giving them an official title, and it's less risky, because there's a lot of freshmen that'll come in and be really enthusiastic, but maybe like don't have the maturity to actually follow through with event planning and things of that nature. So that's why we think it's most effective.
Secular Alliance, and I'm sure other groups have had issues, like you said, with officers not following up on their job. And how do you tactfully and politely let them know that you're dissatisfied with them? You know, we're friends with these people outside of the group, and we don't want to make them feel bad, even though they're doing a crappy job. So
yeah, that's a really tough thing, and we're not perfect at it. Because a lot of us are friends in Unify, and so sometimes it's difficult for the president. We usually, what we do is the president or the vice president will sit down with that individual and just explain the situation and just be frank about it. Like, hey, obviously we're friends, but this stuff needs to get done. Is there anything I can do to help you get it done? I mean, in a lot of cases, it's officers not wanting to delegate because they're afraid it'll look bad if they're too busy, but we'd rather have officers delegate and make sure that things actually get done rather than not get done. So, I mean, I guess give them suggestions rather than being like, so you suck, so do something about it. But yeah, I mean, I don't have a perfect answer for that. It is going to be difficult, but I guess you just have to have a good relationship with your officers and friendship, and just let them know that, like, even though we are friends, like, we have to make sure the group is running well.
Yeah, with regards to running your club like a business, one argument that I've heard is that by avoiding elections, there's a chance that the vision that your officers have for the group and the goals that they have for the group will end up differing significantly from their membership over time. How would you account for that?
Well, sorry, so you're saying that because the members aren't directly voting, that they're, sorry, can you rephrase that? I think make sure I'm clear.
You know, you might have an officership that wants to be very confrontational towards religious people, or not very confrontational at all. And the membership might think something totally different, but if you have an officer who is selecting people who think like him or her over and over again, you might not break out of the kind of pattern that over time could hurt your group in terms of size and activity.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what we've always tried to focus on is just having a diversity of ideas represented. When the big, like, firebrand versus diplomat debate was going on a couple years ago, and that was a big thing, now it's moved on to other issues, we just made sure that we sort of had, like, we had diverse views represented, and I guess you just have to trust the officer team to want to put the members' best interest in mind and make sure that they're being represented. And that's something we continue to do with all the different issues in the secular movement. We don't just want our officer team to be homogenous. We want all these different views represented because it makes for more interesting discussions. And, yeah.
We're a super small, super new group. This is kind of general for everybody, I guess, more. How do you guys go about growing your base, and then growing the base, I guess, in a way that you can get those people that you can trust to delegate to? I say this as a control freak, so any advice? This is therapy for me right now.
Sorry, I'm having a bit of trouble hearing you. You said just how to grow your base?
Yeah, how do you grow your base as a really small group, a really new group to your campus? everybody here, I'm so sure at some point has been involved with something that just started. So, especially in kind of like the secular movement, how do you do that? What's
Yeah.
the best strategy for that?
I mean, there's a lot of ways to just grow your group. Like, a lot of groups do tabling, just the types of events you do a diversity of events. You can get a more diverse group of people out to your events. And I'm sure other people have a lot of good ideas. But for getting like a good base, a lot of what we've done is just try and make members feel like they have a stake in the group. And a lot of it is, hey, even just like small things like wanna serve pasta at the Flying Spaghetti Monster dinner. They feel like they have a stake in the group and that they're really contributing to it. Or like I did with Blasphemy Rights Day, like, hey, do you want to help me plan this event? If people feel like they've had a part in what the group has become, I think people are more likely to stick around. And so, like what Ben said, thank you for bringing that up, because I was actually going to hit that harder and then forgot to. Encouraging people to run for positions is another big thing, because it shows that you see some potential in them and they'll be more likely to listen. In fact, I wouldn't be an officer, and the president of Unify wouldn't be an officer right now if someone hadn't pushed for us really hard to apply, because we both lack confidence and we're like, no, I can't do this. Everyone's too awesome. They're better at this. And they were like, no, be an officer. So here we are.
So because we're so new, we're in the middle of trying to get officers right now. We have some people that are a little bit forward or pushy. And so you had mentioned before about kind of, and the gentleman over there too, about personality. I mean, we're wondering if having people like that would be a good face for the group, you know, for tabling, things like that. I don't know, we're trying not to come off a certain way. So I don't know if you have any ideas.
So are you, sorry, Tony, can you turn up the mic a little bit? Because I'm having trouble hearing people back there. Are you saying that?
Sorry. Is that good?
Anyway,
Are we good? Very cool.
Are you saying that because a lot of the people who want to be officers are confrontational, it's not a good face for the group?
A little bit, yeah. I'm wondering if having that face for the group is a good idea. I know you said you want it to be diverse, and that makes sense. But we're just wondering, because for some reason we have a lot of them. We have a lot of them that are very confrontational, very pushy. And yeah, I don't know how we want to, if we want to give off that vibe.
Yeah, I think that's a problem a lot of groups run into, is the people who want to be officers are the most passionate and therefore the most confrontational and want to get in everyone's face, and that's not always what's best for the group. I think having interviews is a good way to do that. If you're the president or vice president and you guys conduct interviews, that's a good way to correct for that and make sure that it's not just the most outspoken people that get put into positions voted by the members. And then I guess, I think having a diverse range of people is a really good idea, because if other groups get mad and are like, oh, hey, the atheists over here are being really confrontational, you can say, hey, look, there's also a lot of atheists that aren't. We're as diverse as any other group. So I think that's a really good thing to point to. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you.